Okay. My name's Claudia. I'm an alcoholic. And my, excuse me, my sobriety date is October 7th. I don't know what's happened to my voice all of a sudden. My sobriety date is October 7th, 1990. This is the, thank you, one and only time I've come into Alcoholics Anonymous. And I have a sponsor, and she lives as far southeast United States as we are northwest. She lives on Pine Island in Florida, up the coast of Fort Myers. And I go to a meeting with her on Zoom twice a week and try to call her once a week. And that's working for right now. I've always had a sponsor, and I've always had a service commitment ever since I had like 3 months of sobriety. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about what it was like, what I was like, and then what happened. And then hopefully get to spend some time talking about what it's like today, what our interesting, crazy life has looked like. And I don't have a linear story. I listen to people's stories are like, oh, I grew up here and we did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. I have a very chaotic story. When I was 5 and my brother was 3 months old, my father decided he didn't want to be a father anymore. And so my mother and my brother and I were living with my grandparents. We moved from LA to Chicago. I was born in Los Angeles. And at 7, my mother remarried, and that man adopted my brother and me, and they had 2 more children. Upon reflection, I look back at feeling on the outside looking in. I did not understand what that feeling was. I used to get chronic stomach aches when I was a kid. I was anxious a lot. I was so anxious as a baby that my mother told me as an adult that they put phenobarbital in my formula because I was restless, irritable, and discontented from early on. And I didn't know anybody ever felt the way I did. I really didn't. And so I had friends. We moved to the suburbs when I went into junior high school, and that changed my world. I went from being on the streets in Chicago, riding my bike and hanging out with the kids, to play dates and no sidewalks. And it was all very insulated, and people had known each other since kindergarten, and I felt like I was on the outside looking in. And I never thought anybody else felt that way. And I started on other substances in high school because where I grew up in Highland Park, Illinois in the late 60s, that's what was exciting. It was easier to get anything than alcohol. Alcohol was old dusty bottles in my parents' liquor cabinet, which my friends and I drank one night as much as we could, everything that sounded like it would taste good, and I had my first blackout. To this day, I joke that I don't know who kicked a hole in the wall. At some point in the evening, somebody kicked a hole in the wall. My parents were out for the evening. My brother took notes. I was 15, 16. But once I started down that path of other substances, that's where I went. I'm an alcoholic. I am a real alcoholic. And yet for many years, and I think it was a speaker named Earl H., and he talks about somebody coming up to him and going, would you like to try this? And I would say, yes, I would. And I didn't really care what it was or how you took it. I just did it. And so I really didn't. I barely graduated high school. I was majoring in altered states of consciousness, and I did go with a 2.6 GPA, and I went to college, a couple of colleges in a couple of years with some majors like theater and parapsychology and studies of extrasensory perceptions. Dropped out, and I had this roommate, and we'd go out and we'd drink, right? I was underage, but back then in Illinois, we had paper driver's licenses, and a flailed pen and an ink eraser would do wonders. Chris would have 2 beers, and I would just start drinking tequila. I mean, I didn't understand. He'd say, come on, we've had enough, let's go home. And that didn't make any sense to me. But really, I lived in my head a lot. And what my head told me is, someday I'm going to have enough. Figured I'd grow someday. I thought I could find the right guy and have enough money and get the right job, and life would be great. And I did not find the right guy or get the right job, but I made a lot of mistakes and met some unsavory people. And finally, and moved to California, moved back to Chicago. Like I said, my life was not linear. It was really trying anything to get out of me to feel better. But wherever I went, there I was drinking or other things. So I met my future ex-husband, who I had gone to high school with, and we did get married, and we did have 2 children. And my life was so depressing there. We were living in the suburbs. And I remember standing there with a glass of wine, looking out the window at the house across the street and thinking, now that would make me happy. That white picket fence, that life, but not the one I've got. My ex-husband was chronically depressed, and I tried to take responsibility for his happiness, which didn't work. We got divorced, and those years, and I skipped over a whole bunch of stuff, but those years after my divorce, I really got into drinking a lot. I mean, I became a daily drinker. I only drank. I've never drank socially. I've never drank because something tasted good. I always drank for the effect. That's it. People talk about going over the line. There was no, I was born over the line. I like the effect produced by alcohol. And once I picked up a drink, I wanted more. And I wanted more until I threw up, blacked out, or passed out, or they were closing the bar and they're like, you got to go home now. And I didn't want to. So several years of looking for love in all the wrong places. I was a single mom. I was a drunk mom. I was a drive the babysitter home at midnight with the kids in the back of the car drunk. Those were the things that I did. And I didn't think about those things at the time. I just knew my life was miserable. I had a miserable job. Nothing was working. So I've just squished a whole bunch of life into that very short amount of time. And there were a lot of weird stories and a lot of indications that I might have a problem. And I didn't see it. I didn't see the lights. I didn't think about it. I just thought someday I'm going to be taller, and someday I'm going to meet the right guy, and someday I'm going to have the right job and enough money, and everything will be fine. So my last drunk. As usual, it was a Saturday afternoon, and I started drinking mid-afternoon to get ready to go out. And I even went to the store and I bought a couple of bottles of wine to take to a party. And this guy that I had met at a Yom Kippur dance, who was going to pick me up and take me to this party at my friend's house. My kids were with their dad for the weekend. And he came pick me up. We went to the dinner party. I brought some food. And the last thing I remember that night was somebody saying, oh, we're going to make grasshoppers. And that's it. I blacked out after that. Now, I came to on my living room floor the next morning. And I had a moment of clarity. That's all I can say. I joke, it was a sizzling shrub. I came out of a blackout, and I was sick, and I was miserable, and I was embarrassed, and I couldn't recount the last 8 hours And I had dated a guy who was a recovering heroin addict who went to AA meetings, but he still drank. So he and I would go out drinking, and he would tell me about the steps, and he had gone to AA. And I had seen AA on television. I had watched Cagney and Lacey and Hill Street Blues and all these shows where people were going, they were talking about AA. This was the early 90s. And I had this thought that maybe I should call AA. I'd never been to treatment. I'd been to therapy since I was 8. I had a stack of self-help books on the nightstand, but I never had to address alcoholism. I never even addressed addiction. I just knew that my life was miserable, and I thought I was pretty miserable, and I couldn't figure out how to get right. And alcohol was my solution. So I got a Yellow Pages off the shelf, and I called Alcoholics Anonymous at 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning. And I said, I think I have a problem. And this lady says, could you go get to a meeting this afternoon? And I said, yeah, I could do that. She says, okay, well, here's a meeting in Evanston, Illinois. It's a pretty good one. They talk about the steps. I think you'll like it. Can you try not to drink between now and then? I said, I think I could do that. Oh, I was so sick. I was just miserable, hungover. So this is where I'm going to spend a few minutes. So I had to get rid of the bottles. First things first. I took a shower. I had to go pick up my kids 20 miles away from their dad's house, because he wouldn't take them to Sunday school. So I had to go pick them up, bring them back, take them to the temple, and wait for them. And then I had to turn around and drive them 20 miles back to their dad's house and come home. And normally there was this adult education thing, but it was canceled that day. So this other mother, I don't remember her name, and I were standing outside the door, and she said, you okay? And I said, no. And she said, want to get some coffee while we're waiting? And I said, yeah. So she and I sat down, and I told her, I didn't know much about the steps. I said, I have a problem with alcohol. My life is a mess. I said, I think that I might find a solution at Alcoholics Anonymous, and I called them this morning. And I said, and I think I'm going to give it a shot. What I saw later on was that was my first attempt at the first 3 steps. That I'm powerless over alcohol. I had no problem seeing that my life was unmanageable. It was a train wreck. I was on the verge of losing another job. That I came to believe that there was something outside of myself that may be able to help me and maybe restore me to sanity, because I knew I was crazy. In fact, later on, I realized that I liked the fact that I was an alcoholic, because it explained a lot of the crazy. And 3, that I was willing to turn this life, this whatever I was thinking was going to be a good idea, over to whoever it was that was sitting in that room. So I got home. After that, I emptied some bottles. I delivered some wine bottles to some neighbors. I took the recycling bin on my back porch with all the bottles. I can still hear the bottles clinking. Put them in my car. Drove them to somebody else's recycling bin about a mile away, and I took their empty one and brought it back to my house. And I waited. And I waited until 3 o'clock, and I went over to that meeting at St. Luke's Church in Evanston, Illinois, and I went up there. And I walked in the door, and I was a wreck. I was crying and shaking and hungover and sick and miserable. And somebody goes, hey, would you like to read how it works? And so I sat down, and it was a meeting it was a big group, and we read out of the 12 and 12, and then we broke into 2 groups, smoking and non-smoking. And so I read how it works. I still remember 33 years ago reading how it works. Rarely have I seen a person who has thoroughly followed our path. And because I was new, they went back to the first step in the 12 and 12. And broke up into the two groups. And they went around the room. They read from the 12 and 12, and then they went around the room, and people talked about the unmanageability in their lives and the powerlessness over alcohol. And they passed around, I still have it, a newcomer kit. And all the women wrote their names and phone numbers on it. And I went home, and I had a little glimmer of hope. But this other thing happened. The obsession to drink went away. I have not had a drink or a recreational pharmaceutical or anything else like that for over 33 years. I had the obsession removed. So I got home, my ex-husband brought the kids home, and somebody told me where there was a meeting the next night. And so I found people to watch my kids. And this is really where it's amazing, because I became committed to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had to find people to watch my kids. I was broke. I had no family. I couldn't bring my kids to meetings at smoking meetings at 8 o'clock at night. So I had a neighbor. I let her use my washer dryer. She watched my kids. And so I went to a meeting on Monday. That Tuesday, I went to a men's meeting, and they let me stay. And I just started getting into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did have hope. I did have hope. And a couple weeks into it, I walk into my Sunday meeting, and there's this guy there, and I smile at him, and he smiles back at me. And we all of us went out for coffee afterwards, and it was okay. And a couple weeks later, he was there again, and we all were going out for coffee, but at the bottom of the stairs, everybody thinked out. And so it was just him and I standing there. And he says, "Would you like to go out for dinner?" And I said, "Sure." So we went out for dinner, and he asked me for my phone number, and he called me, which was amazing. And we sort of started dating, and I was going to lots of meetings, and I had a first sponsor, and I was 3 months sober. I was given the key to the church that I first went to, and they let me make coffee, old-fashioned 50-cup metal coffee pots. And I started dating this guy. And then a year later, and a month, we got married. But back to my story. I was going to lots of meetings, and it's interesting. I met women, and I don't remember who they are, but I remember there were early on connections that I needed like for a month. Like this one woman who I went to her house, or she had a kid, and I brought my kids there, and they played, and I got connected. I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I made a commitment to this because that amazing thing had happened, that I had the obsession to drink removed. That I would come home after work, and instead of having a drink, I would have orange juice and club soda. Oh yeah, I'll tell a little story that I told the other night somewhere, that when I had 6 days sober, I went on a blind date that my girlfriend and her boyfriend had hooked me up on, and we went to 3 bars that night, and I drank 20 orange juice and club sodas. And I was so bloated. And they asked, "Oh, come on, aren't you going to have a drink?" And I said, "No, I don't drink." And they're, "How long has it been that you haven't drank?" And I was 6 days, but I didn't drink. And so I had this job, and 4 days before our wedding, the company my husband worked for went out of business 4 days before our wedding. And so we're standing on the altar, my 2 kids, his son, with a lot of faith, a lot of conviction that everything was going to be okay. Everything was going to be okay. And he got this job that was amazing. And we decided to move to Phoenix, and we moved to Scottsdale, and we first thing he did when he called me when he went to see the house is it's only about 10 minutes from the nearest fellowship club. And we started going to meetings. And I got a sponsor there. And I started sponsoring women. And for 10 years we lived there, and I watched a Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous grow up around me. We went to some weddings, we got to know wonderful people, and if it wasn't chaotic enough to have 3 kids at home, I decided to go back to school. So I had a bachelor's degree by that time. So I went back and got a couple more advanced degrees. And so after 10 years, I got a job in Sacramento, and we moved. And I'm a good student. I learned what we needed to do. And what we did was I started going to meetings, and I got a new sponsor, and I started sponsoring some women and got real involved in the community in Sacramento. And then after 10 years of teaching, I taught at a university. I was waking up in the morning anxious. I was waking up in the morning dreading. And I realized that I was now doing something that I didn't want to be doing anymore, that it was too stressful, that I do have a stress threshold, that when I get close to that, it's not a healthy place for me to be. And I started seeing a therapist, and I started talking to a counselor at the university. And I remember saying to him, I don't think this is what I want to be doing anymore. And he goes, then don't do it anymore. And I went home and I said to Marty, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. He goes, then don't do it anymore. Said, remember, we agreed you were going to stop doing this when it stopped being fun. And I said, well, it's not fun anymore. It's too stressful. So we moved. And we moved to Boulder City, Nevada, which, if anybody knows, has no skiing because it's in Nevada, and it's right on the banks of the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead. It's about 30 minutes off the Strip. And bought a house there, and I knew what to do. We started going to meetings. We were walking distance from a fellowship club and walking distance from what was going to be my new home group. And I got a sponsor, and that's the sponsor I have today. And we got real involved with the AA community again and developed some really good friendships. And I got involved with a nonprofit and doing some work. And then I made the stupid decision of running for public office, and I got elected, and it was insane, and it was wonderful, and it was insane. And for someone like me with a threshold for stress, I started getting there fortunately, my husband talked me out of running again. And so he said, you know what, let's think about somewhere else to live. And then our son calls us from Connecticut and says, guess what? I got a job offer in Seattle. So our son and our family and the grandkids and my sister, they moved here. And we had really good friends in Langley who had moved here years ago. And I was ready. We were on the 10-year plan. So we sold our house and we moved to Whidbey Island. So what do you do when you move? You go to a meeting and you get into a fellowship, and we go to the fellowship club. And nobody knows me, and I show up at the first business meeting. They go, well, we need a second treasurer. I'll be your treasurer. Well, and I'm like, don't you know who I am? I was the area treasurer for Nevada, Area 42. But I got to know people. I'm getting to know the people here and getting involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. And because it works, I have my own spiritual belief system. I have a sponsor. I have women I sponsor, and it seems like when things start getting a little stale, something happens. And the other day I got a call from a woman that I used to sponsor. I haven't seen her in 12 years. And she called me and she goes, I need help. So we're talking every day now. And that's awesome. And I have 4 granddaughters. Oldest is 8. 2 of our daughters live in Sacramento. Our son lives here. I will never again run for public office. In fact, we made sure we moved to a town that doesn't have any public officers. And life is good. Life is good. Now I suffer from some depression. I have some outside issues, and I treat my outside issues. I've had professional help on those, but those aren't Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I live this program because I don't ever want that life again that I had back then. I wake up in the morning and I know where I am, who I'm with. You know, I'm accountable. I show up, and that's what's really important. You know, once saw a poster that says, "I want to be the person that my dog thinks I am." Yeah, I want to be that person. I want to be a person of good character, and I strive for that. And sometimes I fail, and sometimes I say something stupid, but all in all, it's a good life. And I'm grateful to be here, and I'm grateful you asked me to share. Thank you.
Thank you.